So what I'd like to do is introduce the next speaker. It is Dr. Michelle Dobbratz with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And Michelle is going to be talking about some of the common soil and plant amendments registered in Minnesota. So welcome.
Thank you. My name is Michelle Dobbratz. I've been working at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture for about a year. I got my MS and PhD at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and my bachelor's degree at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I kind of straddled the line between soil and plant science. I was usually sponsored by a soil scientist about half of my time. I have a pretty strong background in nitrogen cycling, and I also took it upon myself. I wanted more practical knowledge after my very formal education. And so I took the crop advisor test last year. And I really want to emphasize that I respect all of your knowledge and I want to learn from you as much as possible because I haven't staked my livelihood on using any of these practices. So if any of you have any experience that you'd like to share at the end in lieu of or in addition to questions, I would love to hear if you all have used these products and what your experiences have been. So just a quick outline of my presentation. I'll provide a little context in the form of the registration history and process. The label requirements, so that's basically what I look for when I'm registering new products. The claim evaluation process, which is something I take really seriously, and actually you'll be happy to know that Minnesota has some of the highest standards in the country, but this still isn't the same standard that someone like your extension educator would set, and I will talk a little bit more about that in detail. We get a huge variety of claims for these products, but I'll just run over a couple example ones that you might see or you might be interested in and what sort of evidence I would need to accept them. And then I'll go through different product types, the most common product types that I see. And lastly, how to try these products on your farm if you're interested in experimenting. On this graph, the number of products or companies is on the y-axis, and then the years starting in 2008 is on the x-axis. This is really a growing industry. Even the number of products has quadrupled in the last decade. And these products are targeted to a variety of markets from hydroponics to gardening to agriculture. Some of them have claims for both or for one or more markets. And there's really an unlimited number of different types of products. It seems, I was just telling Yaba today that it seems every month I get some new product that I've never heard of before and I have to read up on it. Because really, it's not like fertilizer where there's only so many nutrients that you need to know. There's a huge variety of chemicals and claims. First, the registrant acting on behalf of the guarantor submits an application for $200. The guarantor is the one that's legally responsible for the product. Then I review the label to make sure that it is in compliance with Minnesota statute, and I'll go over that in a minute. Around 80% of the products are in compliance, which means that we just register them unconditionally. But this is important to note. The 20 products that are not in compliance, they can still be legally sold in Minnesota. We just write them letters periodically to tell them to update their label to be in compliance. So if it's not a really egregious offense, the products can still be sold, even if it is not technically in compliance with our criteria. It won't stay. It has a mind of its own. Oh, there we go. So the product labels need to have a name so that we can look them up in our system. They need to have a guaranteed analysis, much like specialty fertilizer or fertilizer products where you see what the active ingredients are. The name and address of the guarantee needs to be on there. We need the net weight, the net volume isn't enough. And what does the product do? Some type of purpose statement. Obviously, it needs directions for use, how many ounces per acre, for example. And lastly, something unique in Minnesota is it needs all of the ingredients, even the inactive ingredients, to be listed and quantified. And then I also review any claims on the product. So a lot of times those are in the form of the purpose statement. And I also wanted to let you know that if a claim has language like is designed to or selected to, it doesn't necessarily have to have evidence saying that it will do that, because we can't really test if the product is designed to or is selected to. And words like may and can also mean that the bar for evidence is a little bit lower. So if you see those words and claims on products, be aware that they might not be meeting as much evidence as you might like them to be. Sometimes firms send me hundreds of pages of data that I have to sift through and make sense of. And alternatively, if they don't want to send me data, they can remove or revise the claim, but they still have to have some type of purpose statement. So this may be familiar to you, just sort of basic scientific standards. The evidence needs to be controlled. You all know that crop yields can vary by field, by location, based on weather conditions, basically a number of factors. So if the product isn't grown side by side with something, if the crop isn't grown side by side with a control, you don't know if it's just, oh, there was really good weather that year, or, oh, the soil in that part of the field is better. You don't really know why. So having a control helps compare how the crop would have done without the product. And the control needs to be treated exactly the same way. It needs to be replicated. If you just cut your field in half and apply the soil amendment on one side and not the other, maybe there's more organic matter in that half of the field. Maybe there's more native soil nitrogen. Maybe there are more earthworms. You can't see what's underneath the soil. In grad school, when we did soil sampling, we often discovered gradients that we couldn't tell by looking at the plants above the ground. So this is something that I take really seriously. I like to see at least 3 replicates, 4 is better. Also needs to be statistically significant. Sometimes a plant is bigger than its neighbor plant just because there's natural variability in plant height. So some firms hire statisticians. Some of them just do a basic t-test in Excel. But I make sure that they have some type of statistical analysis. Also, the studies need to be done in an environment similar to Minnesota. Very few companies test in Minnesota, so I would accept data from like North Dakota or Iowa or Wisconsin. Oftentimes, if something says it's drought resistant, it was probably tested, or heat resistant, it's probably tested in an area like the Southwest where they can reliably experience drought or heat. So sometimes I let those go. And then lastly, it needs to be experimentally relevant, and I'll go more into that later. So one common claim is that it improves yield. So to accept this claim, I would have to see that the harvestable yield of at least one crop was increased in at least one instance. I usually like to see more than one crop because this is a pretty big claim, but often it's something that grows in a greenhouse like tomatoes or hemp or peppers. So don't assume that it will necessarily increase the yield of your crop in your circumstance, because it might have been tested on a different species in different soil conditions. Promotes abiotic stress resistance, that's another big one. Nobody likes to lose yield to drought or flood or heat or cold. I like to see more than one type of abiotic stress resistance proven. And like I said, often drought and heat are measured in the Southwest where there's more reliably hot and dry conditions, so the soil can be much different. Other times, large companies just do a lot of studies across the country and hope that some of them happen to experience drought or cold stress. So I see a lot from like North Dakota, South Dakota. Again, this might not translate to your crop, or it might not promote resistance at the relevant crop stage, because maybe the drought was after the plant already started flowering, and your drought is when the plant is in V2 stage, and those would be different mechanisms. So might not do it in all situations. Increases root growth. The roots must have gotten bigger after the addition of the product compared to the control. This is very hard to measure because there's natural variations in root size, and it's also really difficult to clean roots. I did a lot of that in grad school, and it is very tedious to clean roots, as you might imagine. And again, this might not translate into increased water or nutrient uptake. It might be bigger roots, but they might not be improving yield in the way you want them to be. Accelerates breakdown of residue. This is what I'm seeing increasingly. Again, must have at least one experiment showing residue biomass decreased faster than a control. And the big asterisk by this one is the environmental conditions can vary from year to year. So you all probably know you need a lot of moisture to break down biomass, and the warmer it is, the better the biomass will break down. So sometimes even if you add if you add something in a hot, warm environment, it will increase the breakdown of residue. But if you add something in a cold, dry environment, it won't. And then lastly, increases the uptake of micronutrients. We see these claims a lot with humic and fulvic acid products. I'd like to see at least 2 micronutrients in at least one crop. But again, it might not be, it might have been tested on calcium and magnesium, and you might be interested in iron. Microbial soil amendment products are by far the most common. We see a wide variety of claims and a wide variety of species. I've seen everything from beer yeast to mycorrhizae to inoculants with a wide variety of claims. There is an increasing number of humic and fulvic acid products, and I'll talk about them more in a minute. Soil wetting agents have varied chemicals and claims. Nitrogen inhibitors aren't regulated as soil and plant amendments, but I did want to touch on them briefly. And then lastly, carbon-based products are a wide variety of products that can or cannot be helpful. So you all have probably heard this statistic that in 1 gram of rhizosphere soil, there are 10 billion microbes. That's 1 with 10 zeros after it. So you basically, anytime you add any kind of microbe to your soil, it's like you're sending in an army. And for example, you don't necessarily want to send the Russian army in to invade Finland because that's never worked out historically, right? Because Finland has a very specific environment that the Russian soldiers have never been equipped to deal with. So you want to think about what environment you're sending your soldiers into. Symbionts like Bradyrhizobium japonicum, they have plant allies. They have really big plant allies. So inoculants, symbionts, tend to do better when you send them in. So if it's the first time you're growing a legume in a field, or it's been a really long time since you've grown a legume, or there's been some sort of major disturbance like a flood, you might want to add inoculants to your soil. Mycorrhizae, I see a wide variety of claims for these. They are possibly useful after a major disturbance. But just a couple things to keep in mind. If there's a microbial product out there and they're telling you need to apply it every year, that means it's dying every year. So just think about that. You're sending, usually these products have, 10 to the 5th to 10 to the 7th microbes per gram. And then if you need to apply them again next year, all those microbes have died because they're not in their native environment. So the key to increasing soil microbial biomass is building up a suitable environment. I'm sure you've heard this before: cover cropping, reduced tillage, perennials in rotation. This is an if you build it, they will come scenario. So yeah, but just keep in mind there's a wide variety of microbes in any given soil, and the best thing you can do for them is to build a suitable environment. Fulvic and humic acids, we see so many of these products that we've decided that we accept one claim from them, and that is may aid in nutrient uptake. Again, that word may means not proven in every environment, and it doesn't list which nutrients it's good for. So it may help silicone, but not boron or whatever it is that you're interested in. There are a number of researchers at the U, Carl Rosen comes to mind, who are studying the suitability of these humic and fulvic acids. And that's not my background, but I know that the extraction method is how the humic and fulvic acid are extracted from the source matters, and the source material matters. And I would just say, as kind of an aside, to compare the efficiency of increasing the nutrient uptake to adding the nutrients that you need. We often see these used in organic and high value crop situations where organic producers may have fewer fertilizer options. So increasing the efficiency of nutrient uptake is really important. Or vegetable producers may have a situation where a slight increase of magnesium really bumps up their tomato yield or something. So if you're in that situation, talk to your extension educator and see if these might be right for your situation. Soil wetting agents, they have varied claims. They may promote soil absorption of water, especially in hydrophobic soils. So it's well established that surfactants break the surface tension of water, but I haven't seen any evidence of these products improving tilth, percolation, or infiltration. And I'm not aware, I could be wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not aware of any native soils in Minnesota characterized as being hydrophobic. So this is like, these are really important products in something like potting soils, where I don't know if you've ever gotten cheap potting soil and you try to water it and the water just beads off the top of the soil and falls off. That's what these products are really good for. So I haven't seen strong evidence for some of the other claims that they make. So nitrogen inhibitors, you all probably know nitrate is prone to loss through leaching and denitrification. And ammonia is prone to loss through volatilization. And this is valuable fertilizer lost from your farm. Nitrogen inhibitors work by preventing microbes from transforming nitrogen, but they are not regulated as soil plant amendments. I have heard from extension educators that these do work like fairly well in their experience, but they don't always work 100% of the time. So you might want to talk to your extension educators about the right situations to use these. And then lastly, how to try soil amendments on your own farm. So these products are, in my mind, a little bit understudied. So I would recommend taking a scientific approach to trying them on your own farm, because in my university background, we typically wouldn't recommend things to farmers. We wouldn't recommend a whole farm adoption of a practice unless we had really strong on-farm research to promote that practice. So I would recommend choosing an area with poor soil for a number of reasons. But one of them is that organic matter, the more organic matter there is in the soil, the more it tends to buffer against change. So if you add these products to, a lot of these products to like really rich in organic matter soils, you won't see as much of an effect because the organic matter will buffer against the change. That's the job of organic matter. Also in these areas with poor soil, you have the least to lose and the most to gain by improving the situation. So I would recommend dividing it into 6 to 10 sections that are at least 10 feet by 10 feet. We all know that, on the edge of a field, the plants don't grow the same way as they do in the middle of the field. So you want to make sure you have like a middle of your section. You can get brushes that you can pound into the ground so you can still harvest over your plots. If you put flags in the ground, you might not want to run a harvester over them, but you can get these little stakes with like brushes that you can pound into the ground to mark your areas. Randomize to the best of your ability. Remember that uphill is going to be different than downhill. The edge is going to be different than the middle, and there's probably invisible gradients that you can't see. Treat the different areas exactly the same except for the amendment that you're applying. Just try one amendment at a time and do everything else the same. And then compare the control to the treatment in the best way you can. And for bonus points, repeat in a different area next year. Many agronomic studies find that some products will work in one year, maybe a dry year, and then maybe they won't work in a wet year. So if you can do this in more than 1 year, you can understand if it's a good product for the long-term use of your farm. And then lastly, again, this is probably something you all have heard before, but if the product costs $7 an acre and it increased your yield by one bushel an acre, and corn is at $6 a bushel, that math doesn't check out. So really think about the actual profitability, the cost of applying the product, operating the machinery, if you're hiring somebody to apply it, I'd really recommend talking to a local educator or SWCD staff because they're there to help you. And they've seen a lot of these products being used by other farmers in your area. So yeah, does anybody have any questions? Oh, why the dip in registered products in 2020? That's actually, I can't remember exactly why because it was before my time, but there was some change in the way that we registered products. Like it was just some administrative change. There wasn't actually a real dip. It's just a relic of an administrative change. How would the claim may aid in nutrient uptake provide any action from a producer? Does this provide any insight to help a producer to make an operational decision? You know, I would think of these claims more as jumping off points and less as gospel. So if you would like to reduce your nutrient inputs and you'd like to experiment with that, you could, like I said, find an area of the field with poor soil and see, try applying 20 pounds of nitrogen less there, and see if the leaves are just as green and the corn is just as tall. And I would think of them more as jumping off points rather than, it says it aids in nutrient uptake. I'm going to reduce all of my nutrients by 50% on my whole farm. Think about it as it might do that, and it's your job to check on your own farm if it will do that for you. Yeah, how long does it take to process an application, time from when you receive the application to a decision is made? That's a really good question. It varies by time of year as well, because this is actually our busiest time of year. We renew all of our products, so we have several hundred companies that are all renewing products right now. So right now I'm about 4 weeks behind, which is about as behind as I ever get. And then it also depends on if I need evidence from them to move forward with their application. Sometimes it requires lots of going back and forth where I go to the company and I say, you need evidence, but then they provide a figure that is completely unreadable. So then I have to work with them, or maybe their statistics aren't quite right. So I have to work with them to figure out, what they're actually trying to say. So yeah, it usually only takes a couple weeks. So yeah. 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 That's a really good point. Yeah, so just to repeat, the question was, is there any kind of complaint process? For example, there's an example of somebody who tried a biological product and then yields decreased. That is kind of like above my pay grade, honestly. I haven't dealt with enforcement yet. So I don't know if that would be something that you would file with like the Attorney General or our office. Yeah, that's a good question though. Oh, one more question on the side. You showed an increase in products each year. How many products are discontinued each year? That's a really good question. We just did this a couple months ago. There were probably that many folders that were discontinued. So folders are like this thick each, maybe 10 to 20 companies. So 1 to 2 products per company. We do go through each year and pull out companies that haven't indicated that they'll be renewing with us.
Any other questions for Michelle? Well, thank you very much, Michelle.